Hey, it's Matthew from Dark Ascent, and today I'm breaking down the Everest climb where an arrogant influencer ignored every warning his Sherpas gave him and treated the men keeping him alive like they didn't deserve a name. What I discovered about the events that erupted at 21,000 feet and what the search team found days later will genuinely break you. It was April 29th, 2017, and Everest Base Camp sat under a pale afternoon sky at 17,600 feet. The Khumbu Glacier groaning beneath its sprawl of tents and supply caches. Temperatures hovered near freezing in the direct sun but dropped sharply in the shade, where meltwater refroze into slick patches between the rocks. The air smelled of kerosene stoves and instant noodles. Expedition clusters stretched across the moraine in loose neighborhoods, defined by company flags and color-coded duffel bags, each group operating within its own rhythm of preparation, rest, and anxiety. Prayer flags strung between cairns moved in slow arcs, catching wind that carried the distant rumble of seracs calving somewhere high on the icefall. Among the roughly 400 climbers staged at base camp that season was Tyler Ashford, a 36-year-old from Scottsdale, Arizona. Tyler had spent the previous decade building a personal brand around what he called extreme lifestyle optimization, a loosely defined philosophy that combined fitness content, motivational speaking, and curated adventure travel into a social media presence with just under 90,000 followers. His content featured professional-grade photography, drone footage, and captions written in the language of transformation and self-mastery. The aesthetic was polished, the engagement was consistent, the underlying skill set was shallow, and I think that gap between how someone presents and what they can actually do is where most of these stories begin. From what I found, Tyler's mountaineering experience consisted of 3 guided climbs over 14 months, Kilimanjaro via the Machame route, Elbrus from the south side, and a partial attempt on Aconcagua where he turned back at 20,500 feet due to stomach illness he later attributed to tainted water rather than altitude. He had no technical ice climbing experience, no crevasse rescue training beyond a 2-hour orientation at base camp, and no understanding of rope systems beyond clipping an ascender onto a fixed line and sliding it upward. What he possessed was money, gym-built fitness, and an unshakable confidence that preparation was mostly mental. From the research I did on this expedition, his application listed skills he had never actually demonstrated on a mountain. He had paid just over $75,000 to join a commercial expedition operated by a mid-tier Kathmandu-based company. The fee covered permits, logistics, Sherpa support, oxygen, and meals from base camp to summit and back. Tyler had negotiated an additional arrangement allowing a lightweight camera, kit, and collapsible tripod, which his expedition leader approved on the condition it would not slow the team or compromise safety. His assigned lead, Sherpa, was Kanchalakpa Bote, a 41-year-old from Pangboj who had summited Everest 9 times across 12 seasons. Kancha was built compact and solid, his face weathered into deep lines by years of ultraviolet exposure and sub-zero wind. He had begun carrying loads to base camp at 17, graduated to high-altitude support by 22, and earned his first summit before 25. He was known within the guiding community for managing difficult clients with a quiet patience that rarely cracked. The kind of Sherpa expedition leaders requested by name because he reduced problems rather than creating them. He supported a wife, 3 children, and his elderly mother with seasonal income that represented the best earning opportunity available in the Khumbu Valley. And honestly, that part sits heavy with me. The expedition's Western lead was Russell Garrick, a 45-year-old British guide with 6 Everest summits who ran a tight operation built on clear protocols and minimal tolerance for ego. Russell had briefed clients thoroughly before departure from Kathmandu. Turnaround times were non-negotiable. Sherpa instructions were to be followed without argument, and personal filming was permitted only when it did not interfere with climbing operations. Tyler had nodded along during the briefing with the attentive expression of someone who intended to follow none of it. Regular viewers of this channel already know that kind of client shows up in almost every disaster I cover. The first friction appeared during the acclimatization rotation through the Khumbu Icefall to Camp 1 at 19,900 feet. The icefall was a shifting labyrinth of ice towers and crevasses requiring navigation across aluminum ladders and fixed ropes through corridors of unstable seracs. Movement followed an unwritten code. Travel, light, move fast, minimize time in the kill zone. The icefall had claimed more Sherpa lives than any other section of the mountain, and the cultural practice was to pass through quickly and quietly, without unnecessary delay or spectacle. Tyler stopped 4 times during the ascent to set up his camera, twice at ladder crossings. Once beneath a Sarek tower, Kancha had specifically urged him to move past quickly, and once at a rest point where he filmed Sherpas carrying client loads through a narrow passage between ice blocks. Kancha explained the concerns at each stop. Tyler responded each time that he understood the risks and would be quick, then took between 3 and 7 minutes per setup. The delays forced Kancha and the support Sherpa to wait in exposed terrain, adding roughly 20 minutes to a section where every additional minute increased the probability of ice collapse. 20 extra minutes in the icefall for content. That evening at Camp 1, Tyler uploaded a video showing the icefall crossing. The footage included Sherpas navigating ladder systems with heavy loads, framed with narration describing the chaos and danger he had witnessed. The content positioned Tyler as an observer, documenting harsh truths about Everest's infrastructure, with no acknowledgement of the cultural context Kancha had outlined, or the fact that his filming had created the exact kind of unnecessary exposure the protocols existed to prevent. The post collected thousands of views within hours, with comments praising his courage for showing what most climbers were afraid to film. It frustrates me that thousands of people praised that video without knowing what it actually cost the people in it. The second incident developed over several days at Camp 2, the expedition staged for acclimatization rotations on the Lhotse face. At 21,200 feet in the western CWM, the basin trapped solar radiation between the walls of Nuptse and Lhotse, creating afternoon temperatures that could swing 40 degrees above morning lows, turning the environment from bitter cold to an oppressive greenhouse within hours. Tyler's behavior toward the Sherpa team shifted at Camp 2 from thoughtless to openly dismissive. He treated interactions with Kancha as transactions, issuing instructions about meal timing, tent organization, and equipment placement without courtesy. On one occasion witnessed by Sherpas from multiple expeditions, Tyler interrupted Kancha mid-sentence during a weather briefing to ask him to charge a battery pack at the solar array. The request was delivered without eye contact, carrying the tone of someone addressing a task rather than a person. Kancha completed the request without comment, but the interaction circulated through the Sherpa network within the day. Stay with me here, because this pattern is building towards something. Tyler referred to Kancha and the team exclusively as my guys or the support crew in conversations with other Western climbers, never using individual names despite weeks in close quarters. When other clients shared details about their Sherpa teams, names, hometowns, families, Tyler contributed nothing, steering conversations back to his own preparation and mental state. The omission was noted not because it was unusual among certain client types, but because Tyler simultaneously documented every aspect of his expedition for public consumption, creating a detailed narrative that systematically excluded the people doing the most dangerous work. And honestly, that contradiction is what got to me most when I was putting this together. The third incident reached the Sherpa community through a client on another expedition, followed Tyler's account. During the second acclimatization rotation, Tyler had climbed to Camp 3 at 23,500 feet on the Lhotse face, 7 hours of front pointing up steep blue ice on fixed ropes. Upon returning to Camp 2, he posted a photo of himself on the face with a caption detailing the technical difficulty and describing adjustments he had made to anchor placements after noticing what he characterized as rushed rigging. The claim was fabricated. Tyler had not adjusted, tested, or touched any anchor on the Lhotse face. The fixed ropes had been installed over 2 weeks by dedicated Sherpa teams, men who spent 8 to 10 hours per day at extreme altitude drilling ice screws, hauling rope coils, and testing each placement under load. Tyler had clipped onto their ropes and ascended them. That was the extent of his interaction with the infrastructure. I genuinely had to read that post twice. He didn't just ignore their work. He put his name on it. The post was screenshotted and shared through a WhatsApp group used by Sherpa teams across multiple expeditions for logistics coordination. The reaction was immediate. Tyler had not merely failed to credit the rope fixing teams. He had claimed their work as his own, presenting himself to tens of thousands of followers as someone with the technical competence to evaluate and improve professional anchor systems. To the Sherpas who had built those systems, the lie was not simply disrespect. It was erasure of their most dangerous labor, reduced to a backdrop for someone else's personal narrative. Believe me, What comes next matched that anger. Hey, quick reminder that if this kind of in-depth coverage matters to you, subscribing and leaving a like helps support the channel. Make more videos like this. Now let's get back to the mountain. The confrontation occurred on the morning of May 14th. The summit window was approaching. Weather models predicted a high-pressure system within 72 hours, and the tension across the mountain had shifted from preparation to execution. Teams were finalizing oxygen caches, confirming rotation schedules, and making the dozens of small decisions that would determine who reached the summit and who turned back. Word of Tyler's post had been circulating. For 3 days, the Sherpa community on Everest operated as an interconnected network where information moved quickly and reputations were tracked across seasons and companies. Within that network, Tyler had become a focal point, not for a single dramatic act, but for an accumulated pattern of behavior that the fabricated rope claim crystallized into something demanding a collective response. It began around 9 in the morning. Sherpas started descending from higher positions on the Lhotse face and arriving from other expedition clusters at Camp 2. They gathered in an open area near the center of camp, speaking in Nepali with focused intensity that drew attention from Western climbers and guides. By 10 o'clock, more than 50 had assembled. By 10:30, the number exceeded 70. Several expedition leaders approached to ask what was happening and were told firmly that the matter concerned the Sherpa community and the American climber, and that outside involvement was not wanted. In an article I found covering that season, a guide from a different expedition described this gathering as something completely without precedent in his career. Kancha arrived at Tyler's tent before 11. His expression carried the controlled weight of someone delivering a message he had not chosen but would not soften. He told Tyler the community needed to speak with him about the rope fixing post. Tyler responded that he was resting and would deal with it later. Kancha repeated that the situation was serious and delay would make it worse. Tyler told him to handle it and closed the vestibule. The group moved toward Tyler's tent within minutes. They formed a broad circle at roughly 30 feet, a perimeter that effectively cut his tent off from the rest of camp. Men stood with arms crossed or ice axes held at their sides, not raised, not threatening in isolation, but communicating collective readiness in a way that required no translation. The Western CWM had entered its midday greenhouse phase, sunlight bouncing between ice walls and pushing air temperatures above freezing. But the atmosphere inside the circle carried a cold that had nothing to do with weather. Melissa Pratt, a Canadian guide, staged with another expedition roughly 60 yards away, later described the scene as the most controlled display of anger she had witnessed in 9 Everest seasons. The Sherpas were not shouting. They were standing in organized silence, waiting. The absence of noise was more unsettling than any confrontation she had seen on the mountain, and truthfully, just imagining that gives me the chills. Tyler emerged at approximately 11:15, visibly confused by the number of people surrounding him. The response came from multiple directions, delivered in English. He had lied about the rope work. He had stolen credit for their labor. He had disrespected the community for weeks. They wanted a public acknowledgement and apology. Tyler made things worse. He stated the post had been misunderstood. He had only checked some anchors for his own safety. When several Sherpas read the exact caption from their phones, he shifted to arguing that social media was personal expression, not subject to anyone's approval. He added that his expedition fees funded their employment and that he expected professional service without interference. I want you to picture saying that, surrounded by the men who fixed your ropes, carried your gear, and kept you alive for weeks. The words landed in thin air, and the circle contracted, an unconscious collective movement that closed the distance by several feet. Tyler backed against his tent, scanning for support. Western guides stood at the perimeter but did not move closer. Their calculation was pragmatic. Tyler had manufactured this situation, and intervening risked damaging relationships with Sherpa, teams they depended on for future operations. What happened next lasted less than 2 minutes. Tyler attempted to retreat into his tent. Several Sherpas blocked the entrance. Tyler shoved one man backward. Hands seized his jacket. He was pulled toward the center of the circle. He shouted names of Western climbers. Nobody moved. Tyler was struck in the face and torso multiple times. He dropped to his knees on the ice. When he tried to stand, a kick connected with his ribs and he went down again. Blood appeared from a gash above his left eyebrow. His jacket ripped at the shoulder seam. Then it stopped, abruptly, as if a signal had passed through the group that only they could hear. The Sherpas reformed the circle. Tyler remained on his knees, gasping in rapid, shallow breaths that produced a thin, whistling sound. His face was swelling along the left side. At 21,200 feet, where oxygen saturation was already critically compromised. The combination of physical trauma, adrenaline, and stress had pushed his system into acute distress. His hands trembled against the ice, and regular viewers of my channels would already know what this was pointing to. The demand was simple: leave the mountain immediately. Not after resting, not after consulting his expedition leader, not after collecting equipment. 1 hour. If he remained after that, they would return. The statement was delivered without raised voices, which made it land harder than any shout could have. Tyler staggered back to his tent, supported briefly by a Western climber from a neighboring expedition. Inside, he assessed his situation with the impaired judgment of someone operating on insufficient oxygen, elevated cortisol, and fear. His face was damaged, but functional. The cut above his eye had clotted into a dark crust. His ribs ached, but allowed full breaths. His hands would not stop shaking. He made the decision that determined everything that followed. Rather than descending with support, rather than waiting for Russell to negotiate an organized departure, rather than requesting a companion for the route through the Western CWM, Tyler chose to leave immediately and alone. The choice was driven by hypoxia, adrenaline, and the primal logic of flight that altitude strips of all nuance. Lower felt safer. Distance felt like protection. Speed felt like survival. And I think that instinct to just run is exactly the kind of decision altitude makes for you before your brain can catch up. He packed a day pack with a water bottle, energy bars, his phone, a down jacket, and his wallet. He left behind his sleeping bag, stove, supplemental oxygen, radio, an emergency beacon, items that represented the infrastructure of survival at altitude, abandoned in a calculus that prioritized immediate escape over sustained safety. At noon, he started down the Western CWM toward Camp 1. The route covered roughly 2.5 miles across the upper Khumbu Glacier, and from the pictures I found online, it was gentle in angle but scored with crevasse systems, hidden beneath wind-deposited snow bridges. Under normal conditions with proper pacing and companionship, the traverse required about 2 hours. The glacier was marked with bamboo wands, indicating the established route, which wound between ice formations and across snow bridges, whose integrity varied with temperature and time of day. Climbers traveled this section roped to partners or within visual range of others, because a solo crevasse fall without witnesses was functionally a death sentence. I want you to brace yourself, because what comes next is truly horrifying. Tyler descended fast, faster than his body could sustain at altitude, faster than his impaired coordination could safely manage. His oxygen saturation, already low from the confrontation, dropped further with exertion. His peripheral vision narrowed as his brain prioritized central focus. His thoughts fragmented, looping between calculations of distance and surges of adrenaline that disrupted sequential reasoning. He checked his watch repeatedly, fixating on elapsed time as a proxy for safety. At approximately 12:35, roughly a mile below Camp 2, the afternoon sun had been working on the snow surface for hours. Temperatures in the Western CWM had climbed into the mid-20s Fahrenheit, softening the frozen bridges that spanned crevasses across the glacier. Tyler stepped onto a snow bridge that held the appearance of solid ground, white, unmarked, indistinguishable from the terrain on either side. It collapsed without warning. One step, he was walking on a surface that looked no different from any other. The next step, the surface simply ceased to exist beneath him. He fell 26 feet before his body wedged between narrowing walls of blue-green ice. The impact fractured his left femur mid-shaft and cracked 2 vertebrae in his lower back. His head struck the crevasse wall, opening a deep laceration and producing brief unconsciousness. When awareness returned, he was pinned, torso jammed between ice walls, legs dangling, the broken femur producing waves of pain with any movement. Above him, bright sky showed through the ragged hole, roughly 18 feet overhead. His day pack had been torn free during the fall and rested on an ice ledge 10 feet above, visible, completely unreachable. Inside it was his phone. He attempted to shout, but produced only thin sounds that the crevasse walls absorbed rather than projected. The air inside the slot was still and far below zero, insulated from the sun that warmed the surface above. Tyler was dressed for active movement, not for lying motionless on ice. His body began losing heat through direct conduction at a rate his clothing could not counter. The cold entered through his back, his arms, his legs. Everywhere his body pressed against surfaces that existed at temperatures well below freezing. He was found 3.5 hours later. 2 Sherpas descending from Camp 2 with equipment spotted the torn snow bridge and the day pack resting on the ledge. They approached the hole, called down, and received no coherent response. Tyler was visible in the slot below, wedged, motionless, skin waxy and pale, breathing shallow and irregular. 3.5 hours alone in that crevasse. I keep coming back to that number. A rescue assembled within 20 minutes. 6 Sherpas drilled ice screws into solid ice above the crevasse lip and built a hauling system with the gear available. Kanchalakpa Bode, despite having been central to the morning's confrontation, was among the first to arrive at the edge. He volunteered to be lowered into the slot to rig the extraction harness, work that required descending into a confined space where the walls could shift without warning and where the ice holding Tyler could release and send both men deeper into the glacier. The extraction took over 40 minutes. Kancha worked in a space too narrow to fully extend his arms, threading webbing under Tyler's torso by feel while braced against ice, walls that pressed against his own back and shoulders. The hauling team pulled in short increments, 6 inches, reset, 6 inches, each pull scraping Tyler's body against the walls while Kancha guided from below, adjusting the webbing to prevent snagging on irregular surfaces. When Tyler reached the surface, his core temperature had fallen to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. He was unresponsive to voice or touch, and I want you to stay with me because it only gets worse. During the final pull over the crevasse lip, the anchor system shifted, an ice screw rotating in its placement as the load transferred. The movement sent a jolt through the rigging that jerked Kancha sideways in the slot below. His lower back struck a protruding ridge of ice with the full momentum of the sudden lateral shift. The pain was immediate and structural, a deep sensation he recognized as different from bruising or muscle strain. He completed the extraction before reporting the injury, guiding Tyler's body onto stable ice before acknowledging that something in his spine had shifted in a way that would not shift back. The man who was disrespected the most was the one who went into that crevasse to save him. I don't know what else to say about that. Tyler was carried to Camp 1 and staged for helicopter evacuation. When conditions allowed, a rescue flight extracted him from lower on the mountain, where aircraft performance permitted safe operation, and flew him to Kathmandu. He arrived in cardiac arrest, his body having sustained damage beyond what emergency intervention could reverse. Tyler Ashford was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. He was 36 years old. The official cause was listed as traumatic injuries, compounded by severe hypothermia and high-altitude cerebral edema, all resulting from an unassisted crevasse fall. No charges were filed following the investigation by Nepalese authorities. Witness statements were collected from climbers and Sherpas across multiple expeditions, and the review concluded that Tyler's death resulted from his decision to descend alone, while physically injured and cognitively impaired by altitude, not from the confrontation that preceded it. Kanchalakpa Bode was diagnosed with 2 herniated discs sustained during the crevasse extraction. The injury ended his guiding career after 9 summits and 18 years on the mountain.